Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're at. Thank you for joining us for our Spark TS webinar. Today, we're going through Mastering Your DER Role, Part 2 of our series. What I've done for this series is took some of the feedback from number 1 and brought it into today's webinar series. Just some notes before the meeting. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section, in the chat section, so we can address any questions that you have. Please throw them in at any time. We want to have this be your webinar, not our webinar. We want to make it a fun experience for you. Just a little bit about Spark TS. Again, we are a third-party administrator. We have a full-service lab and MRO. We do random pool management and compliance and policy development. We are a full-service drug and alcohol testing site with clinics and mobile collectors all across the country. You can do online ordering and electric document management. And we have RailTasker. RailTasker is our drug and alcohol software platform where you can store and manage all of your drug and alcohol testing paperwork, documents, reports in one place. With that being said, a little bit about Spark TS. Katie Enue is our CEO and founder. She brought and created Spark TS in 2016. In 2022, I came on board as the Vice President of Drug and Alcohol Testing Programs, and Spark TS then also became a TPA as well as a software provider. I love to brag about our team. We have a great TPA team. 2 of our leaders on our TPA team are Georgia Bowen-Waddle and Rachel Bob. All of them, and including myself, are all certified DERs, and they are here to support you and any of our clients with any drug and alcohol testing related needs. I'm Holly Rainwater, the Vice President of Drug and Alcohol Programs here at Spark TS. With that being said, today we're going to go over some procedure questions going in regards to the breath alcohol testing, urine testing, and then I've included some common mistakes that the FTA has found. They go out and do their mock audits, and what they do is they pretend they're actually a donor, go through the collection process, and tell us where the issues are. If you've ever gone out and done a mock collection, if you haven't, I encourage you to. It is an eye-opening experience when you go out there and see what's really happening. As we go through the webinar today, I can share some of the horror stories maybe that I've heard while I've done mock collections. With that, let's start with the actual event itself. When there is a collection event, you want to ensure that the donor has oral and visual privacy, so nobody can hear or see them. The access to that room must be limited, and only the donor should be in the room. Nobody else should be in there unless it's a monitored drug testing event. I have a lot of railroad experience, and a lot of times in railroads, they test multiple donors at one time in a crew. I have seen this where you'll stand in a room and then the breath machine just goes from one donor to the next donor to the next donor. That's not oral and visual privacy. You want to make sure that you've got one donor at a time. Identification. When we identify the donor, there are certain things that we should and shouldn't do. Identification is a photo ID, mostly a government issued like a driver's license. Most employers have an employee badge. That's definitely acceptable, or other identification by federal, state, or local government agencies. The employer can also identify the person. If the supervisor is there, the supervisor can come in and say, yes, this is Holly Rainwater. Then the DER can also do that as well if that DER is there on site. If an employee cannot be properly identified, collectors need to be contacting the DER to do that. And really, it shouldn't be go from that point on. You should be really contacting the DER. Unacceptable forms of identification, coworkers. Johnny coworker can't go, yep, that's Rainwater, go ahead and go. It has to be that supervisor or other donors. If you have just a business card, that's not an acceptable. It has to have that photo ID. Photocopies, faxes, those type of things are not acceptable. There is some situations that are exceptions, and mostly that comes in the world of FMCSA with owner-operators. If an owner-operator or otherwise self-employed person doesn't have proper identification, the collector should, in the remarks, write that positive identification was not available, and then proceed with the collection if the donor has two forms of identification that have a signature, and the collector can compare the signature on that ID to the form. If the signatures don't match, that should be put in the results as signature identification not confirmed. These owner-operators under FMCSA are a completely different entity. You wouldn't do this on a normal basis just if you are in that situation. As for the collector, a collector must provide identification and certification if the DOT requests it, or an employer, or the service agent like us, a CTPA. A collector must provide identification if requested by an employee, but there's no requirement. There's no requirement to have a picture. There's no requirement to show a driver's license or certification, just something that says, hey, this is who I am. A lot of times they may have their company badge. Maybe it says Holly from John's Laboratory, and that's my picture ID. That would be the requirement to show them. But if a federal regulator or a DER, then they have to actually provide their certifications and identification. All right, let's go to breath testing. A couple weeks ago, we did a series or a webinar on going through the form itself. Today, we're going to go through the collection procedures. This is the form. What we do today is just going right through the form. The collection procedures themselves, really just follow the form along. It's almost like reading a book. You might want to refer back to a copy of an alcohol testing form or a chain of custody while we go on today to say, why are we saying that again? But definitely, this is the form. When we start the breath alcohol test, the first thing we're going to do is get that identification. If the donor requests to see yours, then you're going to provide some sort of identification to them. And then you're actually going to flip over the back of that alcohol testing form, and on the back are directions. Then you're going to show them the procedures on the back of the alcohol testing form. Then there's a little script that you can say simply, hey, I'll be conducting an alcohol test on you today. After you sign the alcohol testing form, I'm going to have you blow into the alcohol testing device, and I will record your results. If the result is a 0.02 or greater, you will be required to take a confirmation test. You'll receive a copy of the testing form when we're finished with the process. Right there, it's a nice synopsis of what's going to happen today. When you go through that form, you're going to fill out step 1, okay? What's your name? Holly Rainwater. Write it out. Include that middle initial. You're going to put that social security number or ID number in there. If it's an FMCSA, what do we put in there? We put in the driver's license and state of issuance. So make sure that FMCSA has that CDL information. We are going to also add that employer name, or employer street, city, state, and postal code. And we're going to add that DER name and DER telephone number. This is probably one of the most common areas that we see that don't get completed on alcohol testing forms, especially at clinics. So make sure that information is on there. And maybe you're like, why is that so important? So important because when there's an issue, that collector needs to know how to call you. Additionally, reason for test should be on the form. One thing that differentiates this form versus a chain of custody is it also has the regulatory mode. So an alcohol testing form doesn't have say or FTA on it. It simply says just the reason for test. We've got that. If you do want to notate the mode, you can write that in the remarks. Some people have gone as far as to actually put in on their alcohol testing form the different modes, but you cannot put that inside the actual body of that ATF form. You have to put it way up in the corner, like in the margins, because you can't actually alter that form, and that's considered altering the form. Now we're going to move to step 2, okay? In step 2, you're going to have the employee read, sign, and date step 2. If that employee refuses to sign, the test shouldn't proceed. It would be a refusal if they refuse to sign, okay? One thing I would tell you is that step 2, read it out loud, okay? It says, I certify I'm about to submit to an alcohol test required by the U.S. Department of Transportation regulations, and the identifying information provided on the form is true and correct. Once that statement is signed and dated, then you can actually begin the breath test. If that is not completed, or if the donor refuses to sign, the breath test should stop, because they need to actually agree to submit to that test. We're just going to say that we do have that information. He or she did sign, and then we're going to move on to the next step. So we're going to sign the ATF when they provide the first sample. You're going to look at the EBT. You're going to read out the test number. So it might be test number 184. You're going to show it to the donor. You're going to have a selection of mouthpieces out. This is super important. You just can't say, here's a mouthpiece, and pull it out of the pocket. You want to make sure that there are multiple breath mouthpieces for that donor to select from. And you use it one time. You don't reuse these things. If you have a confirmation test, you better not be using the breath mouthpiece you used in the screening test. Make sure that you always use a new mouthpiece. Once you've looked at that number, the donor has picked their mouthpiece, your machine will do an air blank, and then some will actually show it on the form, others may not show it. And then you're going to instruct the donor to blow into the mouthpiece firmly and steady as long as they can. Now, some tips here. I would not have a donor ever hold the breath machine. If they're holding the breath machine, they could throw it or whatever they wanted to do. And it's a good practice to have that person stand up while you're doing it. If you're sitting down, you're going to slouch, and if they didn't have enough air, they wouldn't have a very good sample. I encourage you to get them to stand up. I always say, put your hands at your side, breathe down from your belly here in your gut, and then breathe in, take a breath of air and blow as hard as you can. Once you've completed that screening test, you're going to show the donor the results. There's a lot of these things you can't see on the ATF, right? You can't see that they're showing you those sequential test numbers and those type of things. After the test is completed, you're going to show them the results. You're going to hit print on your machine, and then if it doesn't print, some machines don't, some screening devices don't print, then you can write that in step 3. In step 3, you're also going to note that you're a BAT, a breath alcohol technician, and you did a breath test. Then you're going to put that printout on the ATF. Then once all that's done and you have that printout on the ATF, then the technician can actually go in and sign and date step 3. Okay? Do not sign without the printout on there, because you're certifying that when that printout is on there that it's correct. If you're signing it and then putting it on, you're not certifying that is correct. Once you have anything less than a 0.02, then it's done. Okay? You actually then give the donor their copy, forward the employer their copy, and then you're going to keep copy 3. If you have a situation where the result is above a 0.02 or greater, you're going to move into a confirmation test. Okay, all those things that we did before are going to come into play again. Okay, but right away you're going to want to let the donor know what's going on, because you're going to see that result is going to say like a 0.024, whatever it says. So you're going to want to say, hey, we've got some other things to do. You're going to let them know that you are doing that confirmation test, and you're going to tell them, here's why we're doing that confirmation test. And then you're going to let them know we're going to have a 15-minute wait period during this time. During this time, you're not to eat, drink, belch, put anything in your mouth, and you should stay with me the entire time. Okay. It's also important to remember during this time, this 15 minutes for a collector and a donor probably seems like an eternity. A lot of collectors have told me this is like that come to Jesus moment in their life. They're like, I really screwed up. Or I've had collectors say, hey, the donor said, hey, I'll pay you $100 if you take the test for me, the confirmation test, so I don't get in trouble. It's a very difficult time, but it's important that time does occur. During that, a script that could be stated would be, since the result of your test is above a 0.02, we're going to take a confirmation test. We will be observing a 15-minute waiting period during this time. You cannot eat, drink, belch, put anything in your mouth. We will take the test even if you disregard my instructions. The waiting period and instructions are for your benefit and will avoid residual alcohol from affecting your confirmation test. And you're going to remain with me that entire time, okay? At this time, the collector should not be calling the DER or the manager. This is just time for the collector and the donor, okay? Some things that, that we want to start thinking about is, okay, we want to ensure that we have that 15-minute break, okay? If we do that test before the 15 minutes, what happens? It's a fatal flaw, we lose the test. If you do that second test at minute 14, you're going to have to stop, go over, do a confirmation test after the 15-minute mark, because that 14-minute will not count. But most machines now are savvy enough to have the 15-minute wait built into the machines. Actually, you cannot even go and do a test before then. Most machines are like that nowadays. There are a few that aren't that way, but it's been nice to have technology be on our side there. We're going to give our 15 minutes, then we're going to select a new mouthpiece. Don't use the old one. Don't use that. Toss it, get a new mouthpiece, let them pick a mouthpiece. We're going to start over. We're going to have them read the unique sequential test number on the device. Remember, it has to be sequential. If it's not, there's an issue with the machine. It can be a flaw. Then we're going to instruct that donor to blow into the device again. We're going to show the donor those results. We're going to print the test results, and then we're going to put them onto the ATF. And then we're going to date and sign the ATF on step 3. And then we're going to, on that one, also mark that we did a 15-minute wait. If the test is above a 0.02, we're going to move to step 4. But if it's not, so let's say that it dropped down to 0.019, then the test is over, right? It's a negative test. We're going to send out the forms to the donor. We're going to give them to the employer in copy 3, and then we let the DER know of the result. But if it's above a 0.02, the donor signs step 4 and dates step 4. Okay. Then we're going to also let the DER know of that result. Definitely keep these in mind. And you see, we said contact that DER in there. Make sure that your phone number is available to those collectors out there. And if it is, it should be that somebody answers it. Don't just have it go to voicemail and leave these collectors out there standing. You definitely want to be available during that collection event. All right, we're going to go into urine testing. I don't know if I don't see any questions out there, anything in the chat yet, but I will say that, when you're going through that last test, a good practice as a DER is, when they say, hey, Holly, I have a positive test, I would take my cell phone, text a picture of the alcohol testing form or the 2 results just to go through it, okay? Hey, is there a breath test? Is there an air blank on here? Because I need to have a confirmation on that air blank, or I have to have the air blank, right, in order to do that confirmatory test. Do I have a 15-minute wait? What was the time of the first test? What was the time of the second test? Are the numbers sequential? Can I read it? A lot of those type of things. You want to make sure that you're doing a once-over on this. I would tell you to do it before the donor and the employee leave or the collector leaves. Get that done right away. Again, I always would have people text me, and it really made a difference, because sometimes I was able to catch things that the collector missed, and was able to remedy them and do it like a confirmation test over again. Okay, with that being said, we're going to move into the urine collection. And this is where a lot of issues happen. It's actually not even the collection event itself, it's where we're doing the collection. I wrote location, okay? Here, location is very important because you want to make sure there's privacy. A lot of times what they would really love, DOT would love us to have a single toilet room, but that doesn't always happen, right? That's very difficult. Reality is in our facilities and at our locations on site, most of them are a multi-stall restroom, okay? When you have many stalls, you're gonna do a monitored collection. But a single toilet room is preferred. If you go to a clinic, a lot of times that's what you're gonna see. You need to have a place, of course, to provide that sample, like a toilet or a void receptacle like a urinal. You're going to need a water source for hand washing, and then you're going to need a clean writing source because you're going to need to be able to write in there. Definitely if you just bring a, I can't even think what they're called right now, but if you bring a board that you can write on in there, that you keep your papers in, that you can definitely use that during the collection event. The collection facility, when you go in there, you want to secure your water sources, okay? Because you want to make sure that there's no tampering, adulteration, or substitution of that sample, okay? When you secure them, you're going to go down, you're going to have to get on your hands and knees, guys, and you're going to have to turn off that water, okay? You're going to put tamper-evident tape over the water, over the handles, over the lid, the receptacles, okay? You're going to put bluing in the toilet, okay? You're going to go around that room and go, okay, if I was going to cheat, what would I do, right? You're going to remove anything like disinfectants. You're going to go in and remove, maybe a lot of times there's cleaning products, get it out of there, right? Anything that could be used to hide, like if there's a box of Kleenexes, a person could slide some fake urine in there, okay? Look around, take everything out that you can. Make sure that the windows and other doorways are secured. You don't want to be doing a test in a bathroom with a big window that everybody can see right inside, okay? In a women's bathroom, a lot of times that will be utilized instead of a man's bathroom because it's a little more cleaner. A lot of times it does have those single stalls in there, easier to secure. A lot of times you'll see women use they'll use the women's bathroom. I've gone through a lot of mock collections and had issues in the bathroom. I don't think there's been a time where I haven't been able to bring in something to adulter the sample. Whether it's I hide something in my pant leg or in my waistband of my outfit, you can bring that in. You want to start thinking like that. Other things I have seen, like when people have gone in to secure the water, they've used packing tape, okay? You really need to be using tamper-evident tape because if you're using packing tape, you can lift that up, lift it back down. My worst is I probably have seen was somebody that used painter's tape, okay? Painter's tape is actually used to be removed easily, so you don't want to be using painter's tape in a collection event. A good idea to check what your collectors are using. You might hear from your collector, tamper-evident tape is very expensive. Do you have any suggestions? A suggestion that I have given out is take your packing tape, put it on top of your lid, and then at the ends of your packing tape, then you can put your tamper-evident tape on the side. It uses less tamper-evident tape, but it does the same purpose. In the collection facility, you want to make sure that the materials and the specimens are restricted. You don't want to be leaving 3 vials of urine on the table, okay? You have to be able to secure that location, and you want to have limited access. Definitely, if you've got a sign, put a sign on the door that says, hey, drug test in process, do not enter, do not disturb, and ensure only one donor is tested at a time. If you have a shy bladder situation, you can continue to do tests on other people, but it must be monitored. Okay, you must monitor those donors. You don't want to start and have everybody fill out step 1, work on step 2. You don't want to do that. It's one person at a time. The specimen should always be in direct control of the collector. During the process, If you're walking with the vial of urine in your hand, you want to make sure that not only you see it, but the donor sees it. Because if it goes out of their sight, let's say I move it here and the donor's back here and he can't see it, he could have a valid concern to say, hey, I didn't see it the whole time and Holly tampered with my urine and that's why I have a positive test for cocaine. Make sure that you are definitely securing and keeping that control of the urine. And again, storage. FRA auditors have recently told me, and FDA auditors as well, that when they've gone out, the urine has been just sitting on a table and then they go to another room and leaving that urine not secured on a table. So you're going to want to make sure that's secured. I've seen collectors seal it up, complete the sample, and then maybe they have scrubs on and they have a big pocket, goes into the pocket or into a locked box. But you don't want to leave that around for people to tamper with. The container is going to hold 55 milliliters. It's going to have a temperature strip. There's going to be a secondary bottle inside. So you're going to actually have your container with 2 split samples inside, and it will have a seal that is not tampered with. And then there's a plastic bag that comes with it that has 2 compartments, one for the chain, one for the urine, and it's going to have it's got to be leak resistant. Something that you can look at, and I've included this in the attachments, is the DOT's top 10 steps to collection site integrity. These are definitely things that you can give to your collectors or when you're going out and doing an audit to take a look at these things to make sure that you have gone through all of these steps to make sure that collection event is uneventful. You don't want to have somebody cheating in the test. I definitely encourage you to take a look at that, share that. Definitely a good piece of advice. Also, on ODAPSY's website, there is an actual mock collection. Take a look at that because it actually walks through the collection process. It's a good material to actually see what the collection process looks like if you have ever been through it, and if you ever want to go out and do those mock audits, how to do them. To the actual test itself, with the drug test, we're going to have our chain of custody, okay? And you're going to want to go ahead and start the testing right away. Don't wait. Even if that donor's like, hey, I got to pee, I got to pee, I got to pee, I got to go now. You know what? You have to first do that alcohol test and then do the urine test. But if a donor says, I can't go, I just went, you still need to have them try to make that attempt to provide. They have to cross the threshold. Again, begin the collection without a day. Tell the donor that if they're like, I can't go, say, hey, most people can provide 45 milliliters if they can't urinate, even if they think they can't, and direct the donor to make that sample. They have to make that attempt. And it's important to take that first attempt because that's when your clock starts for your shy bladder. So if you wait an hour to get that first attempt, guess what? You've just increased the time on your collection. I used to make a practice where at hour 2, my collectors would call me and say, hey, Holly, I've begun the shy bladder process with this person. First thing I'd say is, what time was the first attempt? Because if that first attempt wasn't 2 hours ago and that first attempt had just happened, we have to start the clock over with that actual first attempt crossing the threshold. Again, you're going to positively identify the donor. You're going to explain the collection process. Now, it used to be a while back, the collection process actually used to be on the back of the chain of custody. So you would turn the back of the chain of custody and there it would be. It's not that way anymore. I've actually included in the handouts those instructions, even though they're not on there, you need to be able to reference those instructions to the donor. And just taping them on the wall in the bathroom is fine, as long as you can reference them. But definitely you need to make sure you have those with you. You're going to make sure that testing authority is correct, DOT or non-DOT, and then you will complete step 1. Okay, step 1, your MRO, DER, reason for test, those type of things. You're going to also then instruct the donor to remove any outer garments, okay? Outer garments are like hat, gloves, those type of things, a coat. I had somebody one time say, hey, they came in a vest, like not one of those zip up vests, but like a sweater vest. And he said, you should have had me take off that sweater vest, but it was actually like part of your clothing. It went over you. It was not considered an outer garment. It was like considered part of your garments. Keep an eye on what you're doing in that situation. In this regards too, I would also add cell phones. Make sure that they're taking out cell phones and any of those personal belongings as well, not taking those into the collection location. The other thing that you'll do is have them empty their pockets. You're going to want to say, okay, here's my wallet. I've got some change in my pocket. Maybe here's an old Kleenex. But if you find things like here's a vial of something that could be fake urine, that becomes a different situation, right? And when you empty the pockets out, you want to have them actually open up their wallet and display the contents of their wallet. That doesn't mean the collector takes the wallet and thumbs through it. It means the collector takes the wallet, has the donor open it up, and has the donor thumb through it to make sure there's nothing in there that could tamper with the test. Any purses, or actually after all of that, they can actually put those things back into their pocket if they don't think they'll tamper with the event. Any purses, briefcases, those type of things should be secured, okay? So you want to make sure if you've got a lockbox for them, or if you can lock the room up, they can stay in there. But those things should not go into that collection location, including like a cell phone. And then, of course, you want to wash your hands before the test begins. Once the site is secure and you can do the testing process, the donor is going to select a cup. Just like we did in the breath test, we're going to have multiple cups on the table, and the donor is going to pick their cup. The donor takes that cup into the toilet area. Here I wrote, must pass that threshold. And then the collector says, do not flush the toilet. I need you to give me at least 45 milliliters, and then return the collection cup here in the next few minutes. Really, they use like that 4-minute timer really here, because it shouldn't take longer than that to provide a void. But a collector is going to have to listen in on what's going on. And then that collector is going to hand that cup back to the collector. Again, keeping that cup in the donor's side at all times. When the collector gets the cup back, they're going to check for the volume, temperature, and alteration. So if there's floaties in there, or if it's blue, maybe somebody's cheating with the test, okay? And you want to make sure that they do have that 45 mils so they can split the void appropriately. But if you get a cold sample and your void is short, maybe you got 20 mils, but it's cold, you're going to want to keep that, because now that could then constitute that person was trying to cheat, and then you would move to a direct observation like the regulations say. You're going to put your findings in step 2. In step 2, you can write, yep, it was in temperature range or it was not, and that it was a urine test. During that time, the next portion is that we're going to split that sample into 2 vials. We're going to put it into the 30. We're going to do 30 in one, 15 in another. The collector is going to then take off the seal on the chain of custody, put it on the vial, put it on the second vial. Then the collector is going to go and date the vials, okay, in front of the donor. Then they're going to take the remaining urine, dispose of it, throw it down the toilet, and then bring those 2 vials and the chain of custody back to the donor, have the donor look at the 2 vials, have the donor look at the chain of custody, make sure they match. If they don't match, it's a fatal flaw. You want those to match. Then you're going to tell the donor, okay, now that you can see that this all matches, I need you to initial each bottle. Then the donor initials the bottle. This is a big area here where people make mistakes here. I've seen it where the collector dates it on the form, and then the donor comes in and initials it on the form. It can't be done on the form. It needs to be done on top of the vial. The label needs to be taken off and put on the vial. If you get a chain of custody in, go to the bottom, and if you see like initials and things like that have bled through on with that carbon copy, you'll see that maybe some people have been doing that incorrectly. Then this is weird, like all of our math goes away, right? We know 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 5. The collector is then going to open up the document to page 5, And that's where the donor is going to read and sign the instructions and then sign and date it. It's because that top copy doesn't have a donor name on it. It only has that ID number on it. So then the lab can't make any determination who that urine is for. We have them actually turn it to and sign step 5, date step 5. Then we actually turn the document back, and then the collector will sign and date it. They're also going to put the urine in a tamper evident seal or a bag, excuse me, and then put it in a secure location for pickup. If the donor refuses to sign, it is not a refusal. The collector then just writes their printed name in the donor line, and then the collector should write refuse to sign in the remarks. The collector continues the completion of the form and sends it to the lab. If the urine is out of range, then the collector is going to mark in step 2 that's out of range. They're not going to disregard that sample. Okay, if you have no idea what to do with the sample, never throw it away. Bottle it up. If the collector has to call somebody and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, do you agree with me? Bottle it up, because once you dump it, you can't get it back. Always bottle it up. You can bottle it up and then dump it, but bottle it up. The collector then is going to go through that normal process, files A and B. It's going to do step 4 and 5 on the chain of custody, and then let the donor know, hey, we're going to do a collection under direct observation. In the remarks, you're going to write 1 of 2, and reference the other chain of custody, and then same on the other. And you're going to do a second test under direct observation. With insufficiency, and this is another big area that I find issues with, is people are not going through the insufficient quantity of a specimen correctly. Okay, here's how we find this. If we're getting paperwork in and we're doing the audit, and maybe the breath test was done at 1500, and then we see the urine test was done at 1701, like, well, why was there such a gap here? What we find out is during that gap, the donor, and if we look in the remarks, nothing's there. The collector didn't write all the attempts that donor has made. For each attempt, they should write like insufficient, INSF. That person attempted at 1350, they gave me 15 mils, and they drank 5 ounces of water. That should all be documented in the remarks, okay? If it's not, they're not following part 40 correctly. Then you're given fluid up to 40 ounces in that 3-hour period. If a donor declines not to drink the water, it's not a refusal. Or liquid, excuse me, I shouldn't say water, it can be a liquid as long as it's measurable. Don't say, hey, go take a few gulps out of the drinking fountain over here. You can't measure that. You need to be able to measure it. A lot of our DOT jobs will actually have water bottles there. You might have 8 ounces of water there. Those small water bottles, utilize them. We want to make sure that the donor is attempting to make and provide samples during that collection process. I was just going to check. I know we've gone through a lot before I just really quickly peek at some of these issues that FTA has found. Does anybody have any questions? Do we have any comments that have come in? Here's a question. Can an employee dispute a BAT positive because of a fatal flaw the collector did not properly do the confirmation test? The answer is no, they can't dispute it because there should have never been one. If there's a fatal flaw, the test is gone. It's canceled. There's nothing to dispute. Let's just say that the collector doesn't do an air blank test before the confirmation test. That's a fatal flaw. There's no positive test because DOT regulations say that would be a fatal flaw. And let's say that maybe there wasn't a 15-minute wait. That's a fatal flaw. Okay. However, if you're working with your collectors and they're notifying you right away and you're saying, hey, text me a copy of that result, and you catch it, you can say, hey, go back, get me another confirmation test with an air blank this time. Or I need you to go back in there and do another test after 15 minutes. You can get those things. So yeah, there would be no positive test if there was a fatal flaw. Does DOT allow digital chain of custody forms, or do we still use multi-page paper forms? Great question. In regards to DOT, urine allows for the use of digital chains. I think right now there's one laboratory, almost two, that almost have it 100% paperless, where you don't even have to send a paper chain with the urine anymore, but that's coming. But right now you cannot do an alcohol test under DOT with a digital form. That still has to be on paper. And I think that's why we get so many errors on our breath alcohol forms, is because of that. And then it says, just curious, does the employee need to sign off on anything that states they received the collection process? I'm not 100% sure what that is, but different modes have different rules in regards to that, like in regards to notification of being tested. Like FTA has a certain rule that you have to inform those people that they're going to be tested. It all depends on the mode. I would say in regards to the test, doing that test and signing off on that test is saying that, hey, you've received that test. And that's also why it's super important, like when the collector does that process, that they're not taking any shortcuts. If you're reading through the form, hey, Holly Rainwater, I have you here for a U.S. Department of Transportation test. Your employer is this, your ID number is this. I have you here today for a random test. And then that person go, oh, I don't even work there yet. How can I have a random test? Oh, it should be pre-employment. That's part of that process. Very good questions. We are hoping that the alcohol testing really does go to a digital form very soon. We would really like that. We do get non-results back on electronic documents, which is pretty great for breath alcohol.
Holly, I've got one question that came up recently. It came to our knowledge that the directions for the collection process are no longer written on the back of the chain of custody form. What are our collectors supposed to do because of this in FRA and or DOT regulations?
Yeah, good question. And I feel like this was like it was almost like we missed this part, right? When the new chain of custodies came out, I think back in 2020, they stopped printing the directions on the back of COC. Now that means as a collector, that collector is responsible for bringing those instructions. You can find those instructions on ODAPSI's website. Additionally, on the chat, I put some handouts. One of the handouts is those instructions. You can just take a copy of that, laminate it, put it with that collection paperwork. You can also take that document, let's just say you're in the bathroom, and you could put it on the wall and reference it. But yeah, if you're audited and you don't do that, you're not giving them instructions, because one of the first things you need to do is provide instructions or show them where those instructions are. Great question. I think another question that I have seen is, what if somebody is supposed to go in for a drug and a urine test, and they don't have a breath machine, and they can only do the drug screen? Do you send them back? The answer is, have they been informed, right? Have they been informed they're gonna take a breath test? If you can't get that breath test done like immediately, I would be like trying to get somebody with a machine to get in there. But really, you can't proceed because they've already been notified. You're gonna have to document that for sure. But once they've been notified, that collection event must begin. What I would recommend is, if you're going to a clinic, you need to call in advance and say, hey, I'm bringing somebody in. I've got this collection event. Will somebody be there to do this breath test? Be prepared, make sure that collector is available. Sometimes, like that breath alcohol technician, if there's only one, maybe they're sick, maybe their machine's broken. You don't want to get yourself in that situation. Let's see, I don't see any other questions that have come in. But I know our time is limited, but I wanted to just make sure that you've got a chance to peek at some of these errors that people find, that the auditors have found here. Again, not the one that Georgia just said, right? We're not explaining the collection procedures. 74% of their audits didn't have that, okay? So they weren't showing them that direction on the form. A lot of times here it says collectors complete step 4 of the CCF before the donors are instructed to fill out step 5. Remember, we have to flip it back So we don't count in order. We go 1, 2, 3, 5. Step 5, we're flipping it. The donor signs and acknowledges it. Then we're going to actually flip it back. The collector is going to acknowledge that everything they've done it. They followed all the procedures. That's the last step. The last step is 4. Make sure that those steps are happening in the right direction. Another big one is those vials and signing them and dating them. They're getting signed and dated on the form, or they're having the collector sign and or initial and date. More specifically, a lot of them are having the donor date them and initial them. Make sure the collector puts the seal on the vial, dates it, goes over and ensures that those numbers match on the form, shows the donor that they match, then the donor initials. Auditors also found a lot of paraphernalia in the restrooms. Make sure you're doing a once over in there. The littlest thing can cheat a drug test. Here's one: donors were not instructed to empty their pockets. Again, we want to make sure that they're not bringing in any adulterants. And 32% didn't use bluing in the toilet. I think that's interesting. You need to be using bluing. 32% also weren't required to wash their hands before the collection. Definitely have to provide or wash their hands before that void. The collectors did not check the enclosure before the collection began. They didn't go do a walkthrough of that bathroom. Again, I bet everybody on this call could bring something, and I'm not telling you to cheat, but if you go into a restroom, think, how would I secure this bathroom? I encourage you, because we have things like water that's automatic now. It's hard to secure that. You have to make sure you're covering the right things on that, on the water. But if you're going on site and you have collectors coming in, walk through your bathrooms. Make sure your collectors are walking through their bathrooms. Okay. Imagine securing a locker room. You got all these lockers. You're gonna have to tape all those lockers. So be careful what you're doing. But people weren't going in and doing a check of the collection location. Others did not have them remove outer garments. Again, here's the donors are instructed to initial the bottle seals while they're affixed to the chain. Donors weren't allowed to keep their wallet or cash when emptying their pockets. And the collectors did not check what the donors wrote in step 5. Okay. One audit that I did, I said my name was whatever it was, and then I signed it as a different name, and they didn't catch it. So make sure that that matches. Some people even say go as far as to look at that ID again and match it. If you want to do a mock collection, that's a great way to see if your collector is actually doing what they need to be doing. Other mistakes that they found: using a non-federal or outdated chain of custody. That's a huge one, right? You make sure you're using the right authority. Requiring donors to sign a release or waiver of liability before they go on with the testing. Asking donors to empty all of their pockets, including their back pants and shirts, to reduce the chance of adulterants being brought into the collection location. So just saying, hey, empty out your front pockets, that's not enough, because they've got pockets in their back. They have cargo pants on, they're going to have pockets on their sides. Flannel shirts, maybe a pocket shirt. So make sure they're getting all of the pockets. And then also not inspecting the collection location after you get that cup. Once you get the cup, the collector should walk around and say, just look like the same place that I left. If you've got like paper and containers on the floor that weren't there when you started, that person could have tried to cheat the test. And then another one, not informing a donor what's permitted or forbidden during that 3-hour shy bladder. Again, errors on the chain of custody with the collection site MRO, not putting the reason for test. We still see people put other as a reason for a DOT test. That test there's no DOT test called other. And in section F, they don't mark what the test panel is. Step 2, they're not writing the attempts. They're not putting the time, how much was provided. They're not marking split. On step 4, the time of the collection does not include AM or PM. Make sure they're circling that, because you can't tell if it's 1 AM or 1 PM. And then they need to also put in the name of that delivery service. So you just can't write courier. It has to be like FedEx or Quest Diagnostics or whatever it is that you're using for your courier. And then step 5, and this is a big one, a lot of times the donor is transposing the date of the collection and their birthday. And then no evening phone number provided. This one, you have to have one phone number in there. So make sure it's available. A lot of people just have one phone anymore. And then the donor's name or signature is missing and the collector has not made a remark in step 2. Maybe they said, I'm not signing this. The donor didn't, write the name in and then say they refused to sign. Again, they put this one down, which is, I think, an odd one, that direct observed collections should be done by a collector who's the same gender, but apparently they were finding people who were doing it that weren't the same gender, and they were saying, hey, I'm a nurse, so I can do this. I can do a direct observe on somebody in the opposite gender. Again, breath alcohol issues, using the wrong authority, not explaining the collection process. Okay, on this one, you go flip it back. Actually, they didn't take it off of the back of this one. Not requiring employee to sign step 2. Big no. They need to sign before they blow. Not updating the EBT during daylight savings time. Some EBTs will actually go from daylight savings time and they'll spring forward or fall back, whatever they need to do. Some do it on their own. Others, it's a manual process. A good practice is you got to change your EBTs when those happen. And if you forget, which can happen, you have to notate that in the remarks. And then here, failing to enter information in the remarks section, the employee declines to sign step 4. And not signing step 4 is where they say they have a positive test and they understand it's above a 0.02. Donor doesn't have to sign that. If they refuse, they just notate that. Big one, another big error is during a positive test, not marking that 15-minute wait, writing in this is one of my favorites, writing in the test number, device information, or any results with the screening result attached, okay? Don't write it in and tape it to the form, one or the other. I like the print, I'm old-fashioned, I guess. They have it affixed to the form, but don't do it both, okay? It's like canceling each other out. You don't want that, one or the other. And then, of course, that confirmation test needs to be printed, okay? Failing to get that printed result on a confirmation test is a fatal flaw. Cancel the test. There is no test because it will have to be canceled. Okay, I went through a lot. I tried to do a deep dive into the collection process. I know there's a lot of other things inside of that event. It looks like I got a couple other questions. I've got the listed error percentages. Is that the percentage of total audits that committed the error or percentage of only the non-compliant audits? My understanding it is of the 100% of the audits, 74% maybe had one of those errors. Of the total audits that they did, that was how many errors had occurred. This one says, we've had times where the donor just finished eating lunch and was asked to take a breath alcohol test. Would the DER need to avoid this practice when an employee is subject to a DOT drug and alcohol random? I would say that best practice for DOT drug and alcohol random is, number one, they're unannounced. That's the number one. And then you want to spread them throughout the day, beginning, middle, end of shift. If this question is hard because you could have people that are drinking at lunch. Doing that breath test after lunch could be a good thing, okay? That eating shouldn't really impact that test, but definitely you don't want somebody putting something in their mouth and then blowing in the machine. That can't happen, but the collector should be doing that. I'm not sure if I answered that question completely. Please let me know. Are we experiencing more positive tests since COVID? Have you seen a decrease in number of tests nationwide? During COVID, there were more positive tests. Additionally, especially with alcohol tests, the tests were actually coming up higher. What may have been a 0.08 before maybe was coming up now 0.12. I know several of DERs that I've talked to had a lot of during COVID right after 0.2. So pretty high tests in there. Drugs, I think people are doing that to have this is the only way I can calm down, or they're maybe not necessarily just COVID, but they're going and doing more edibles and things like that, thinking that, okay, I'm going to do this CBD gummy and you know what, there's THC in it. So they test positive. The number of tests that have occurred, if that's what this is, it says, have you seen a decrease in the number of tests nationwide? I don't think we've seen a decrease in the number of tests that are being performed. I think that's been very constant. We are required to do testing under DOT at certain percentages. That has maintained same. We have to still do that. I think I have seen more reasonable cause testing that's occurred, and that's primarily on the company level, that more companies are doing testing in regards to if there's a situation that occurs. On the railroad side, railroads have actually federal cause testing. More of them are doing that. Hopefully that answers that question. I think a lot of it depends on the employer. Actually, we did a webinar, oh my goodness, maybe 6 months ago. It was about statistics and knowing your numbers. You should really be looking at what's going on at your company to determine if you should do more testing. Because if you're having a lot of alcohol test positives, you might not even be catching them all. What happens if you would up your percentage a little bit more? You never know. Really know your numbers in that regards. But we do have a webinar. If you can go to sparkts.net, you can find that webinar and download it actually. That was our quick deep dive into the drug and alcohol testing process. Unfortunately, you're not all certified today, but I recommend that you really understand the collection procedures in your role. It's super important. How many came in today and said, yep, I know you have to flip the page on the chain of custody and sign step 5, have the donor sign step 5, and then flip it back and then sign step 4. I mean, it's really good to know those things. Look at your chain of custodies with a different set of eyes, okay? Because you might see those people signing the seals on your chain. And if you can, get out there and do those mock audits. It's definitely an eye-opening experience. You know, do them clandestine, make sure nobody knows who you are, and go out and do it. I mean, it really is impacting the safety of our transportation industry. With that being said, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to having you at our webinar, DER Part 3. If you have ideas or feedback for us on what you'd like to learn about or what you'd like to talk about, or if you'd like to talk on the webinar, we'd love to have you. Please let us know. Thank you for attending today, and have a great day.